Hello, listeners. Thank you for tuning into the podcast. Ginger and I have talked in passing about some of the benefits of LEED, Energy Star, and other building certification programs throughout our first season, but we thought it might be time, as we're nearing the end, to do a little compare, contrast, and discuss some of the real values and the potential challenges of certifying your buildings, which you should definitely do. Whether you're an owner, investor, facilities manager, building consultant, or designer, there are ways to simplify the certification process and also lower costs when you have a good approach. And having a green certified building can really increase building value and resale value from day one. So listen up. Good to have you here, Ginger.
Well, very, very glad to be here, Ian. This episode is for anyone who's considering going through that certification process. But you might still be on the fence or wavering in your decision due to the cost. It's a little confusing as far as process goes. So we'll do our best here to break down 5 of the most popular building certification programs, point you in the right direction, and when it comes to your specific project, you'll be ready to go.
That's right. Clearly, as we always say, each project is going to have unique requirements, individual project goals, but as always, having the sustainability conversation early on in the process can set you up for success, regardless of whether or not you end up deciding to pursue certification. And you'll have a leg up if you do, if you're clear on what the options are beforehand. So that's really our goal today. Ginger, could you start by telling us the 5 certification programs that we'll be highlighting today?
Absolutely. We've got Energy Star. I think probably most folks have heard of Energy Star. LEED certification, WELL program, Passive House, and Living Building Challenge. So they're very, very different programs, all 5 of them to be sure, but all with a similar goal: creating healthier, more resilient, and less environmentally impactful buildings.
Yes, and building occupants. It's interesting. You're starting to hear more and more about people-centered businesses these days, which is a great step in the right direction under our lens of people, profit, and planet. It's my new catchphrase. Wouldn't it be cool to see more people-centered buildings and have people talk about that? So we're going to tell the story today of how some of these programs have evolved and paved the way for this corporate movement that is finally beginning to recognize that shareholder profit or stakeholder profit in the development world is a short-term approach, and unfortunately leads to long-term demise for all of the above: people, profit, and planet.
Absolutely. We're going into a brand new era, Ian, and we're seeing the effects of decades of deal makers and patriarchy sticking their heads in the sand and only considering costs when it comes to people and environment that doesn't even come into the picture. So the time has come for that to change, and I think it is changing.
Yeah, I read, this was last week, that Morgan Stanley announced that it will be the first investment firm, one of the big 5, to disclose the carbon footprint of all their loans and investments. So clearly the tide is shifting, even if it's, even if that's just lip service. That was pretty cool to read.
It's a movement.
It is. Sure. Shall we get started with the building certification, Ginger?
Sure, let's do it.
Cool.
You're the research fellow here, so when it comes to building science and all that, so where do you want to start? I think LEED's probably the most well-known program out there. So wouldn't you say that's a good start?
Yeah, LEED, I would agree, is probably the most popular, sure. But I'd actually like to start, if you're all right with it, with a little sleeper program that we've referenced before, and you did mention that people have heard of before, called Energy Star. Now, this EPA-backed label is actually more recognizable probably than LEED. But when it comes to specifically building certification, there is only one leader, which is LEED, in case you missed that pun.
Cute. So Energy Star is more than just efficient appliances and windows and all that. So how long has the Energy Star program been around?
For buildings, great question. The pilot for the buildings program ran in 1993. Believe that? It's been almost 3 decades that it's been around. And while it is a great program for comparing the efficiency of buildings, it honestly hasn't been a real driver of many cutting edge business practices or new methodologies, methodologies in the field. It's kind of, basically lined itself up with building to code or building slightly above code, but it's not, it's not pushing any like,
serious
clear
environmental
boundaries or anything. I do think it's interesting though that, it calls itself a performance driven program, but most of the requirements are actually prescriptive.
Aha. So can you explain to our listeners what you mean by performance driven versus prescriptive path program? So how does that fit in with some of the other programs?
Yeah, totally. Since I'm talking history here, LEED is going to be the next oldest US program, clocking in with its first version adopted by the US GBC Green Building Council in 1998. The early days of LEED weren't super fruitful, but by the time version 3 came out, about 9 years later, 2006 or 2007, I believe, it was inarguably the front runner for most building types, assuming that an integrated, holistic approach was your goal rather than solely focusing on energy efficiency. And that's sort of one of the biggest differences between LEED and Energy Star. To your question though, until pretty recently, both programs were pretty much fully prescriptive, meaning that they had a set of checklists or guidelines to follow. Projects are required and have always been required to do energy modeling based on the design, which then helps achieve a certain level of certification. And there's also as-built modeling. So if the model changes, if the building changes over the course of the construction process, then you have to do that energy modeling over again. You can't just rely on the original design. But there's no continued monitoring of the actual building performance. And that's the biggest difference between prescriptive and performance-based, in my opinion.
Interesting. So you mentioned an integrated holistic design approach with LEED, and we've been through some training on that and definitely understand their methodology there. So I know our company has categories like sustainable sites, water efficiency, energy and atmosphere, materials and resources, indoor environmental quality, and innovation. So covers a lot of bases.
And it's no coincidence that as we were outlining this first season of the podcast, if you look through the names of the episodes, we tried really hard to follow their lead. Another one thrown in there. Yep. And help folks kind of think about all the different sustainability variables, as you mentioned, involved in achieving a well-designed and a successful green build.
Sorry, I missed you. You want to go back to the...
Do you want to go back to your line? Because you said our company has categories but it's actually LEED has categories.
I saw sustainable and I was like, I think that caught my attention. So you mentioned an integrated holistic design approach with LEED. I know from our company training that LEED has categories like sustainable sites, water efficiency, energy and atmosphere, materials and resources, indoor environmental quality, and innovation. So those are fantastic categories.
Yeah, you were paying attention in class. Good job. Those are all the categories. Thanks. And it's not amazing. A coincidence, obviously, that as we were outlining this first season of the podcast, we tried really hard to follow their lead, pun intended, and help folks think about all the different sustainability variables involved in achieving a well-designed and successful green build.
I have a question though. Do LEED and Energy Star work in tandem at all? Or is there many crossovers when it comes to certifications from those different programs?
Yeah, that's a great question. You can actually, if you want to think of LEED as being sort of an umbrella program over Energy Star to some degree. Obviously, we agree with both programs that energy efficiency is a key component for designing an environmentally friendly building. And LEED has certain prerequisites that do end up lining up directly with how you would achieve that Energy Star certification. So you can kind of get 2 for 1 in a way. But as you mentioned, LEED took it quite a bit further. They brought water, indoor air quality, access to light, healthy materials.
The human aspect there.
Yeah, we just did our materials episode. Was our last one, in fact. And has been popular. Everybody's listening to it, so that's cool. Yeah, and LEED actually stands for Leadership in energy and environmental design. So you can see just from the title how they got to that place. We're getting, you know, they're getting closer and closer to that people-centered building idea.
What about price points? Are they at all similar as far as certification between them?
Honestly, between these two, there's a pretty decent cost difference. LEED is definitely the more expensive because you need somebody to sort of usher you through the process, where with Energy Star, you just, most of the registration and certification can be done online. You do have to hire some people to come in and do those building performance tests, as we talked about. But outside of that, it's really just the registration and the certification fees, which are a couple thousand. It's not very much.
Okay. So for a project that's looking for certification, but doesn't have a big budget for sustainability yet, Energy Star is a good starting point, right?
Yeah, exactly. Energy Star lines up pretty well, as I said already, with code requirements or slightly above code. And the score that you end up receiving is really based on how efficient your building is related to other buildings of the same size and type. And that's different from the points system that LEED uses. And one of the other benefits, I guess, of Energy Star, and the big difference here, is that there's a certain standardization. You're comparing apples to apples, where the benefit of LEED for a long time was its flexibility, actually, because you could choose to focus your efforts in certain areas. You could do all, I'm going to have a really amazing water system, and then, maybe not insulate as much, that kind of thing. And so you can make these cost benefit decisions. That flexibility is changing now. There's some newer programs that we're about to talk about that are coming out that are truly more performance based. And so
a little more stringent.
Yeah. And LEED has adopted some of that approach for their newer versions.
Okay. So what about reuse? We know that the biggest ways we can combat climate change is to use actual existing building stock and renovate. So do LEED and Energy Star have certification opportunities for renovations and retrofits?
They do. LEED has a program called EBOM, Existing Building Operation and Maintenance, but it's mainly geared toward commercial, and it's really kind of requires that it be a full gut rehab. So maybe there are some applications in single family, but not as much. Energy Star also certifies a lot of existing building stock when it comes to commercial, but unfortunately they don't have a program for existing homes. They just have a new construction in their homes division.
Right, not reused. So it seems like both programs should consider setting up separate programs for existing homes to incentivize renovation. I mean, they need separate program for that over new construction. And, we all want to reduce embodied carbon. So that's the goal for sure.
Yeah. The embodied carbon piece, as we've talked about in many of our episodes, is super important. And that's a great idea. And I don't really know why they don't, to be honest. So if anyone out there listening knows why existing homes aren't on the list of building certification types for Energy Star and LEED, I would love to know the answer.
We want to know the answer.
Exactly. Email at info@shfbuild.com with questions, comments, answers to that question, suggestions for topics in the future. We'd love to hear from you. And please check us out on Patreon if you like what we're doing here and would like to become a donor. If you go there, we're in the process of launching that. So if you go there and you don't see us, then give us a couple days and check back. But yeah, we're really excited about continuing this podcast and really going into more depth.
Terrific. Yes. Also check us out on YouTube. We have all of our podcast episodes up for the discussions part. Not the discussions that's to come, but so we have our interviews as we speak being uploaded. So, and Facebook, of course. And so we'll see you on Instagram as well. So we have a lot of great ideas for the second season, and we'd love your help. Please help us make it happen. So Ian, should we get back on track? Let's see about the historical timeline. Which program comes next?
Yes, history. Well, Living Building Challenge and Passive House US both came online. And if you ever see PHIUS, that's FIUS. That is Passive House Institute of US. if you ever see that, or if you see LBC, that's Living Building Challenge, if you're in the biz. And they both came online around the same time and launched in 2006, 2007, respectively. But neither program actually certified any buildings until a couple years later. So 2010 was the first time that they actually got something certified. And there's a very important reason for that. Can you guess why that might be?
Well, I bet you it has something to do with prescriptive path versus performance-based certification. What do you think?
It does, yes, A+. Passive House is definitely geared a bit more toward building performance than a prescriptive path. And in order to be certified with Living Building Challenge, your building actually has to report 12 full months of energy modeling, hence the multiple year delay in getting anything certified. So, not only would you have to do the initial design process, but then you have to have 12 full months after the fact, and you have to continue that to keep your certification, which is great. That's
it is.
You can't just get an oil change once and then never do it again and say I'm good.
Right, exactly right.
But yeah, both those programs are quite a bit more stringent than LEED started out to be, and as far as what's required on the design and also on the construction side. So there were fewer buildings that would even be considered when the programs first came out. And while these programs aren't actually that much more expensive than LEED, so they're in a similar category as LEED, to register and certify, it's really the process of Living Building Challenge and also the design process and the stringent process of Passive House that require more upfront soft costs, as we've referred to before, rather than the actual certification cost itself.
So can you talk a little bit more about the additional requirements other than energy reporting that's required?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we don't have time to go into every little detail, but both Living Building Challenge and Passive House US are all or nothing certifications. So, you're putting a lot of time, effort, energy, risk ultimately into compiling a good project team to adhere to these building requirements. And you are taking that risk that your team's hard work would, potentially not result in a successful project. So you better be really sure that you trust all the people on your project. For LEED, in opposition to that, for LEED, you can shoot for platinum and end up with gold. Still have certification at the end of the day.
Satisfaction. Something there. So bigger risk, bigger reward, and ultimately you end up with a better building, actually, using Living Building Challenge and Passive House guidelines, I think. What do you think?
Yeah. Passive House started in Germany in the 80s and 90s, and it's focused on a tight building envelope, really high performance windows, and minimal mechanical systems, as we've talked about before. You can go back and listen to our architecture episode, our site analysis and sustainable site analysis episode, and we really talk a lot about passive design and how on the front end that's necessary to minimize those mechanical systems. And so for the right climate, it's a fantastic architectural solution for lowering energy consumption and lowering environmental impact, just by doing some good things on the design side. While LBC, Living Building Challenge, has a 7-petal system, basically a flower, with each petal representing an integral part of the design process. Pretty similar to LEED, actually, but the petals in this case are a little different. And they're place, water, energy, materials. So we're on the same track so far, right? And then the last 3 are health and happiness, equity, and beauty, believe it or not.
What a concept, health and happiness, my goodness. To actually take that into consideration in your building, that's pretty astonishing. So equity and beauty, now that's where we're really talking.
Yeah.
Rubber meets the road.
Far cry from simply energy modeling during the design process. A lot more required. And Passive House has done a really great job of developing programs because they came over from Germany originally. They had a system that worked for that climate because all those climates are pretty similar in Germany. And then they came over to the US where we have all these different climate zones. And so they've actually developed programs for certifying builders and designers and making sure that folks in the industry are up to speed on that. And they've also come up with different solutions and different requirements and guidelines for different climate zones, which is different than any of the other programs, really. Some of them have that same approach, but it's more intuitive. But in this one, they're like, no, if you're in this climate zone, this is how you do it. And that's very
Thank
cool.
goodness for that guidance. Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
So,
but it is mainly still a prescriptive program like Energy Star. That's the only downside. I mean, there's more rigorous performance testing at the end of the process, but there are no
mhm.
energy monitoring requirements.
Ah,
So it's still kind of, on the levels here. It's like, I guess you could say lead and passive house are like on the same level, but in sort of different environments. And then LBC for sure, Living Building Challenge is like at the top when it comes to uh,
Yeah, I agree.
healthy buildings.
Long-term performance
Mm-hmm.
is really the key there. Absolutely. So, so what kind of buildings would actually that be good for?
Um, yeah. So speaking to Passive House, you can actually go on the Passive House website. I'll put a link in the show notes, and you can check out all of Passive House's certified U.S. projects. There's, I think there's in the thousands now, and they're overwhelmingly doing residential new construction.
Ah,
So
right.
pros
You
and
know,
cons there. There are a couple retrofit. There's a couple commercial school projects on there, but yeah, mostly single family and multifamily residential.
so I would assume Living Building Challenge is doing more municipal, commercial office projects rather than, just based on their people-focused approach that fits.
Yeah, exactly. The more people, the more impact. The requirements for Living Building Challenge go as far as making sure that your contractors are super safe.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Not using like single-use water bottles on site. I mean, these little things that seem kind of arbitrary, but really do add up to an overall approach that is way more sustainable. And I said the real kicker is you got to report those 12 months of energy monitoring.
yeah,
So
right.
and you got to be zero water and you got to be zero energies, which is really hard to do unless you're
That's
fully
a
committed to the
commitment for
process.
sure.
Yeah. So, and it's a big team that you have to have on board to really vet all the
Yeah.
materials, and making sure nothing that you're using is on that red list, the red list.
The red list. Oh my gosh. We talked about that in our last episode on sustainable materials. So
That's right.
please take a listen if you haven't already. We go into a little bit more depth on it. So you mentioned earlier, Ian, that LEED has changed a bit over the years. So what exactly have they changed in the process?
Great question. For a long time, you could use, as I said, either a prescriptive or a more performance-based path for many of those prerequisite categories. And now they're really moving toward a fully performance-based approach. So it's not just about, you still have to do the energy modeling. I mean, as we've talked about many times, you still got to do that.
Baseline.
Yeah, that's the baseline for anything
But,
that's called green building or sustainable or whatever. Um, but yeah, I think they saw the writing on the wall with Living Building Challenge really, and realized that they needed to also move in that direction where, they were focusing more on, okay, how is this going to perform? Not just, do we have all the people in the room at the beginning? So it's, it's stepping their program up a little bit. It does cut down on some of that flexibility that clients and project managers really liked about LEED. You can't put all your eggs in one basket, one part of the certification anymore. But
smart though.
one
Smart.
cool thing that they do, and I know you love innovation, I love it too. I really like what they do with innovation because they allow points for systems integration, for materiality, for things that aren't on the checklist. It all goes into the innovation category. You can get points for that. And
Oh, wonderful.
you can actually it's
Of
an
course.
opportunity to sort of do case studies and evaluate some of these cutting edge
Exactly.
ideas. And if at the end of that you have a really great idea that everybody else needs to know about, then it can help you disseminate that out into the green building community. So that's a really cool element of LEED.
Absolutely. I mean, the building industry is in the middle of an evolution, a revolution. So we have to keep up, and new technologies, new materials, and all those things need to come online in that very thing you're talking about.
And we need to just share all these ideas. Yeah.
Share, exactly.
Yeah.
So what is the fifth one again, Ian? You said well, right?
Well, yes, the WELL building standard. Yes. The most recent historic addition to our top 5 officially launched just 6 years ago in 2014. And this one is definitely performance and data driven big time, entirely focused on fostering health and wellness of people in buildings. So they took that health and happiness pedal from Living Building Challenge, our people-centered buildings idea, and they really kicked it up a notch. So quite a few notches, actually.
Interesting. So they have a point system, or is it pass and fail?
Sort of a hybrid, actually. There are minimum requirements that have to be met in each category, sort of like LEED. And then they have what are called optimizations in each category rather than specific points. So they actually have a formula where you do a certain percentage of the overall optimizations, and then based on the percentage of optimizations that you've done, then you get to gold or platinum. So yeah, it's complicated, sort of like LEED a little bit, but and I know we said we'd just do 5, but it's actually worth mentioning that there's another program called Fitwell, Fitwel, that in my humble opinion is a less expensive and less rigorous version of WELL. So application wise, it might be a good fit for a cost conscious existing building that's looking for a lower barrier to certification. But it definitely doesn't provide that full scope. Yeah, that WELL can for your building or for the people in it. Man, we've covered a lot. Do you have any more big picture questions, Ginger? Or?
Well, no specific questions. We covered a lot. So just wanting to reiterate something we said at the top, which is for many of these programs and certifications, you have to get the whole gang together, sit down, come up with good design ideas. They're all integrated. They're all talked about in the beginning. So we can't really hammer that home enough for you guys. So good design, good organization in the beginning. So listen to our episode called Design Charrette for more details on that process.
Yeah, I'm glad you said it again, because not only can that lead to a successful building certification, but it will also lead, as we said, to a building that's healthier, brighter, more comfortable, more beautiful, connected to nature, better suited to keep the occupants happy, not to mention our goal of keeping the planet healthy for all of us in the coming years.
And that is the ultimate goal. So cheers to that, Ian. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Please check out our YouTube channel, Sustainable Homes of the Future channel, for video interviews. We've got our podcast up there as well. So post us some comments, send us suggestions for topics. We'd really love to hear more about it. So see our show notes for a link.
Indeed. If you have more detailed questions about any of these programs, please reach out to info@shfbuild.com. We'd love to help you, your next building project, be a true sustainability success and be part of that team. Until next time, think about the people you work with and the people you live with, and imagine what a healthier future could look like if every building was zero waste, zero carbon, zero energy, zero water. I mean, we're building the future here, folks.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ginger, and thank you to everyone listening.
Thank you, Ian.
Thanks for coming along for the ride.
Pleasure.